Have you ever spent years of your life caring for someone you love, pouring your heart and every penny of your savings into their recovery, only to have the person who did absolutely nothing sweep in and take the entire reward? Have you ever looked into your own mother's eyes and realized she's willing to watch you become homeless just to keep her golden child happy? If you think blood is thicker than water, wait until you hear what my brother did to me. My name is Claire, and this is my story. The rain was hammering against the windows of my father's study, but the atmosphere inside was even colder. I sat on the small wooden chair in the corner while my older brother, Sterling, lounged behind our father's mahogany desk like he already owned the air in the room. He was holding a single piece of paper, a smug smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. My mother stood behind him, her hand resting protectively on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, Claire," Sterling said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. But Alistair was very clear. He realized you simply don't have the financial maturity to handle an inheritance of this size. He slid a revised will across the desk, dated 3 days before Alistair died, leaving the $5 million estate to him and exactly $500 to me. "This is a forgery," I whispered, my hands trembling. The signature looked like my father, but the loops were too perfect. My mother stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "Don't be dramatic, Claire. Sterling has always been the one destined to carry the Montgomery name. You were always just comfortable being the help." I looked at her, searching for a shred of the woman who used to read me bedtime stories, but all I saw was a stranger blinded by her favorite son. Sterling didn't even wait for the funeral flowers to wilt before he told me I had 48 hours to pack. He wanted to renovate my room into a walk-in humidor for his cigar collection. They weren't just taking my money. They were erasing me from the only home I had ever known, laughing as they tossed a $500 check at my feet. By noon the next day, the locks were changed. I stood on the sidewalk with 2 suitcases, watching a locksmith shake hands with Sterling. My mother was already directing movers to take my father's antique furniture out to make space for Sterling's new gaming suite. I had spent my entire life's savings on Alistair's medical bills, expenses Sterling had promised to reimburse once the estate was settled. I checked my bank account, $12.42. Combined with Sterling's generous $500, I was essentially homeless. I looked up at the house, and Sterling was standing on the balcony, holding a glass of Alistair's vintage scotch. He raised the glass to me and blew a mock kiss. He thought he had won because he had the paper and the keys. He forgot one thing. I was the one who spent 10 years cataloging the family archives. He had the house, but I had the secrets buried in the dust. I didn't go to a shelter. I went to a storage unit I had kept secret for years, pulling out a crate labeled old tax records. Inside was a leather-bound ledger that belonged to my grandfather, a man who didn't trust banks or lawyers. As I flipped through the yellowed pages, I found the original deed to the land and notes on architectural anomalies. My grandfather had built a sub-basement that wasn't on any modern city map, and more importantly, he had set up a legal land trust that predated the current will. I felt a cold, sharp grin spread across my face. Sterling thought he was the master of the manor, but he was actually a squatter on land that belonged to whoever held the silver key. I reached into the bottom of the box and pulled out a heavy, tarnished key I'd found in Alistair's bedside drawer the night he died. The game wasn't over. I was just moving the pieces into the shadows. Sterling didn't realize that the junk he let me take included a set of antique silver GPS trackers my father had used for his vintage car collection. While he was busy picking out Italian marble for his new bathroom, I was busy sewing those tiny chips into the linings of the family heirlooms he planned to sell. He thought he was liquidating old, dusty junk to fund his lifestyle, but every time a piece of our history left that house, my phone pinged with its exact location. I watched the first notification pop up. Alistair's 1920s gold watch was moving toward a high-end pawn shop downtown. Sterling was already bleeding the estate dry. But he didn't know that the silver key I held wasn't just for a basement. It was linked to a digital vault that sent an automatic stolen property alert to the authorities the moment those items were scanned for resale. I sat in my small, temporary apartment, watching the map. He was stealing from the estate, and I was making sure there was a digital paper trail for every single penny. 3 weeks after being kicked out, I stood across the street from the house in the middle of the night. The golden child was throwing a party. I could see the strobe lights flashing through the stained glass windows and hear the thump of bass vibrating the walls. My mother was there too, playing the perfect hostess to Sterling's shallow friends. They were celebrating their new beginning on the grave of my father's hard work. The wind was biting, but I didn't feel the cold. I felt a singular, burning purpose. I pulled out my phone and accessed the Architectural Anomalies app I'd spent the last week coding. Because I knew the house's wiring better than anyone, I had been able to tap into the smart home system Sterling had so arrogantly installed. With one tap, I cut the heater in the master bedroom and the kitchen. Let them have their party. They were about to find out that the house itself didn't want them there. Sterling, ever the narcissist, decided he needed to tear down the eyesore of a shed in the backyard to build a luxury pool. He hired a crew and told them to just level it. What he didn't know was that the shed sat directly over the main water line and the ancient, brittle sewage pipes of the Montgomery estate. I knew the contractors he'd hired, a cheap crew he found to save money so he could spend more on his designer suits. I didn't stop them. In fact, I sent an anonymous tip to the city's historical society about unauthorized demolition of a landmark structure. By the time the backhoe took its first swing, 3 city inspectors were pulling into the driveway. Sterling was about to learn that renovating, without my father's meticulous records, was a one-way ticket to a $50,000 fine and a total construction freeze. This was the masterpiece of my grandfather's design. The estate wasn't just a house. It was registered as a private museum to save on taxes, a status that required a licensed curator to live on site and maintain the archives. That curator was me. When Sterling and Mom kicked me out, they technically violated the tax-exempt status of the property. I waited until the end of the month, then I quietly filed a change of residency form with the county tax assessor. Without a curator on site, the property taxes instantly jumped from $4,000 a year to $85,000 a year, backdated to the moment I was evicted. I could almost hear the sound of Sterling's bank account draining when that notice hit his mailbox. He thought he inherited a gold mine, but I had just turned the house into a black hole for his stolen cash. Sterling wasn't just selling the furniture. He started eyeing Mom's old-fashioned jewelry, promising her he'd have the stones reset into something modern. What he actually did was take her $50,000 diamond brooch to a private dealer to cover his ballooning credit card debt. But I had already replaced the real stones with high-quality cubic zirconia weeks before I was kicked out. When the dealer called Sterling a low-life scammer for trying to hawk glass as diamonds, Sterling came home in a rage. He accused Mom of hiding the real jewelry from him. For the first time, the golden child and the doting mother were at each other's throats. I sat in my car outside the house, listening to their muffled screaming through the smart home speakers. The cracks in their perfect alliance were finally starting to show, and all it took was a little bit of fake sparkle. To prove he was still high society, Sterling decided to host the annual Heritage Gala at the house, an event my father had hosted for 20 years. He invited every local billionaire, politician, and socialite to show off his new empire. He spent $100,000 on catering and a valet service he couldn't afford, convinced that the night would end with new business partners and investors. I didn't try to crash the party. I didn't have to. I just made sure the city inspectors, coincidentally, chose that exact evening to conduct their follow-up inspection for the illegal construction. Just as the first appetizers were being served, 3 black SUVs pulled into the driveway, blue lights flashing. In front of the wealthiest people in the city, Sterling was served with a notice of immediate vacancy for safety violations. The socialites started whispering, and the golden child's face turned a shade of purple I'll never forget. While the guests were fleeing the unsafe house, I moved to the next phase, the bloodline audit. I knew my father had a secret life insurance policy, one that was only accessible through a DNA-verified portal. Sterling had tried to claim it, but because he had lost the paperwork, the company was stalling. I sent an anonymous letter to the insurance investigators suggesting a discrepancy in the lineage. I knew something Sterling didn't. Alistair had always suspected he wasn't Sterling's biological father, but he had kept the secret to protect Mom. By triggering an official audit, I wasn't just stalling the money. I was forcing a DNA test that would potentially strip Sterling of his legal right to the Montgomery name entirely. The hunter was about to find out he wasn't even part of the pack. While the house was under a city-mandated lockdown, I used the silver key to enter through the old coal chute in the back. I navigated the dark, narrow tunnels my grandfather had built until I reached the sub-basement. It wasn't just a storage room, it was a reinforced vault. Inside, I found the Holy Grail, a video recording Alastair had made just days before his sudden illness, along with the original will, the one Sterling thought he had burned. In the video, Alastair explained how he knew Sterling was plotting against him. He hadn't left me $500, he had left me the entire estate, hidden behind a silver key protocol. I sat in the flickering light of the vault, clutching the real will to my chest. I had the truth, I had the law, and now I had the power to make them both disappear. I didn't just want to take the house back. I wanted Sterling to incriminate himself so deeply that no lawyer could save him. Using the silver key to slip back into the study, I placed a draft of the forged will, the one Sterling used, into Alastair's secret wall safe. But I made one tiny adjustment. I left a confession note, written in Sterling's own handwriting, a skill I'd practiced for a week, tucked inside the pages. The note detailed exactly how he drugged Alastair's tea to get that shaky signature. I knew Sterling would go to that safe the moment his bank account hit zero, looking for the emergency cash Alastair used to keep there. When he found the confession, he wouldn't realize I planted it. His guilty conscience would make him think Alastair had documented his crimes before he died. I watched through the hidden nanny cam as Sterling found the paper, his hands shaking so hard he dropped his glass of scotch. By Wednesday, the tension in the house was radioactive. Mom was crying in the parlor because the golden child had just screamed at her for letting Alastair write that note. She finally realized that the son she'd protected didn't love her. He only loved the lifestyle she provided. Sterling was spiraling, convinced that the house was haunted by Alastair's ghost. He started ripping up the floorboards in the hallway, looking for more hidden notes or evidence against him. Every time he made a hole in the wall, he was destroying the value of the very property he fought to steal. I watched the feed on my phone, sipping a cheap coffee in my car, as my mother finally packed a small bag and sat on the porch, realized that her perfect son was losing his mind. The insurance investigators didn't just send a letter, they sent a court-ordered medical team. Because the estate was in a legal notice of vacancy, lock, they had the right to enter. Sterling tried to block the door, shouting about his rights, but the lead investigator just looked at him with a cold, professional pity. "Mr. Montgomery, if you want the $2 million payout, we need the swab. It's standard procedure for contested lineages." Sterling, arrogant as ever, thought he could fake it. He tried to use a swab he'd taken from a discarded toothbrush of mine he found in the trash. But I had already switched his kit with one that was pre-tagged. The results wouldn't just show he wasn't Alastair's son. They would show a genetic match to a local career criminal my mother had a brief fling with 30 years ago. The truth wasn't just coming out, it was coming out with a vengeance. Here was the final nail in the financial coffin. Sterling hadn't just inherited the house. He'd inherited the massive maintenance mortgage Alastair had taken out to keep the Victorian structure standing. Alastair had always paid it through a private trust that only I had the password for. Sterling didn't even know the mortgage existed until the bank's final notice of foreclosure arrived. Because of the property tax trap, Sterling had no liquidity left. He tried to call the bank to negotiate, but I had already flagged the account for potential fraud due to the contested will. The bank froze everything. Sterling was sitting in a $5 million mansion with no lights, no water, and a legal team that was about to walk away because his checks were bouncing. The golden child was officially bankrupt in a house that was literally falling apart around him. At 2:00 a.m., the silence of the mansion was shattered by the ringing of the landline, the only thing Sterling hadn't managed to get disconnected yet. It was the bank's automated fraud department. Thanks to the potential fraud flag I'd placed, every single one of Sterling's recent transactions, the designer watches, the high-end catering, the leased sports car, was being reversed. I watched through the security feed as Sterling scrambled to his laptop, his face illuminated by the harsh white light of the screen. He watched his balance drop from 5 figures to negative thousands in a matter of seconds. He started screaming at the screen, throwing his glass of expensive scotch at the wall. He was realizing that he didn't just have no money. He was now tens of thousands of dollars in debt to a bank that had zero patience for favored sons. The following morning, the front door didn't open for guests. It was kicked in by the sheriff's department. Because Sterling had failed to respond to the notice of immediate vacancy, and the back taxes were now delinquent, the city had officially foreclosed. I stood on the sidewalk, hidden behind a pair of dark sunglasses, as the officers handed Sterling a bright orange order to vacate notice. He was in his silk robe, his hair a mess, looking like a ghost of the man who had kicked me out weeks ago. "You can't do this, I'm a Montgomery," he bellowed. The sheriff didn't even blink. "According to the city records, Mr. Montgomery, the only legal resident on file is a Claire Montgomery, and she hasn't lived here in a month. You're a squatter. You have 1 hour to grab what fits in a suitcase." Sterling and Mom retreated to a cheap motel, but Sterling, desperate to claw back his status, demanded Mom call a family meeting at a local diner, thinking he could manipulate me into saving the family name. I showed up looking better than I ever had, wearing a suit I'd bought with the small inheritance Alastair had hidden for me in the Silver Key vault. The dinner was a train wreck. Sterling tried to play the victim, claiming hackers had ruined him, but I just laid a folder on the table. Inside was the DNA result and the confession note. My mother's face went white as she realized I knew everything, including the fact that Sterling wasn't a Montgomery. "The family name isn't yours to save, Sterling," I said, my voice cold as ice. "And as of this morning, Mom, you've been removed as a beneficiary of the trust for aiding in the forgery of a legal document." The golden child tried to lunge at me across the table, but I didn't move. The police I'd called were already standing at the door. As the police escorted Sterling out of the diner for disorderly conduct, I stayed behind with my mother. She was shaking, her golden child finally revealed to be a broke, violent fraud. "How could you do this to your brother?" she sobbed. I leaned in close, my voice a whisper. "He wasn't my brother, Mom. He was your project. And while you were busy making him a king, you forgot that I was the one who actually kept the kingdom running." I handed her a single $500 check, the exact amount they had given me, and walked out. I didn't look back as she realized that she was now entirely dependent on the daughter she had tossed aside like trash. The masks were off, and the real game, the one where I take it all back, was just reaching its climax. Sterling's last hope was a heavy brass key he'd found taped to the back of Alastair's portrait. He was convinced it led to a secret offshore account or a stash of physical gold. He spent his last $100 on a cab to the city's oldest private bank, dragging Mom along to look respectable. He burst into the vault room, his eyes wild with greed demanding access to the box associated with the key. The bank teller opened the box and Sterling's heart nearly stopped. It wasn't gold. It wasn't cash. It was a stack of legal invoices and a series of cease and desist letters Alastair had written years ago against Sterling's secret gambling debts. At the very bottom was a note. "To Sterling, you always looked for a shortcut. Here is the cost of everyone you took." There was no money. Alastair had used the safety deposit box as a graveyard for Sterling's failures. Sterling collapsed onto the marble floor, the brass key clattering uselessly beside him. To satisfy the back taxes and the property tax trap I had set, the city scheduled an asset liquidation auction. Everything inside the house, the furniture, the art, the silver, was put on the block to pay off the debts Sterling had accrued in his 3 weeks of madness. The auction was held on the front lawn. I showed up in a black town car, watching from behind tinted windows as the neighbors, the same ones Sterling had tried to impress at the gala, bid pennies on the dollar for the Montgomery legacy. I saw Sterling and Mom standing at the edge of the crowd, watching as a stranger bought Alastair's favorite leather armchair for $50. They were watching their entire identity being sold off to pay for a lifestyle they never earned. Then came the main event, the house itself. The bidding started at the price of the outstanding debt. The crowd went silent as the auctioneer called for openers. Sterling looked hopeful for a second, thinking some wealthy friend might buy it and keep him on as a manager. 1 million, a voice called out. It was my lawyer standing right next to me. The crowd turned. Sterling's eyes bugged out as he saw me step out of the car. 1.5, another bidder tried. 2 million, my lawyer countered instantly. I wasn't just buying a house. I was buying back my history with the money I'd secured from the insurance payout and the Silver Key Trust. When the hammer fell and the auctioneer shouted, "Sold," I looked directly at Sterling. He was no longer the owner. He wasn't even a guest. He was a spectator to my success. After the auction ended and the crowds cleared, I walked up the steps of the porch. Sterling tried to block my path, his face twisted in a mask of pure hatred. "You cheated. You manipulated the system. This house belongs to the son of Alastair Montgomery." I didn't flinch. I pulled the DNA results from my pocket and held them up. "The system didn't fail you, Sterling. Your biology did." I leaned in, and for the first time I let him see the fire in my eyes. "I didn't have to cheat. I just had to wait for you to be yourself. You destroyed this house because you didn't know how to love it. I bought it because I'm the only one who knows where the foundation is buried." I handed him a bill for the damages he caused during his renovation. A bill for $250,000. "Pay it, or I'll see you in criminal court for the forgery." With the house legally back in my possession, I didn't waste a second. I invited the estate's original attorney, the one Sterling had fired, into the sub-basement vault. There, under the glow of the emergency lights, we opened the iron box that responded only to the silver key. Inside wasn't just a copy of the will. It was a digital video file and a series of notarized documents titled, "In Case of My Untimely Death." In the video, my father spoke clearly and calmly. He detailed how he had caught Sterling practicing his signature months ago. He explained that he knew the golden child would try to forge a new will, so he had created a legal dead man's switch. The moment a forged document was filed with the city, this vault's location was sent to a private investigator. The real will didn't just give me the house. It explicitly disinherited Sterling and my mother for acts of moral turpitude. The evidence was absolute. The fallout was swifter than a guillotine. Armed with the real will and the video evidence, my attorney filed for an emergency hearing. The judge took one look at the side-by-side signatures and the medical reports showing the sedatives in my father's system during his final days, and she issued a warrant. Sterling wasn't lounging in a motel anymore. He was picked up by the police while trying to pawn a set of silver spoons he'd smuggled out of the house in his luggage. Because he had used the forged will to secure loans and sell estate assets, he was hit with multiple counts of grand larceny, wire fraud, and identity theft. The golden child was traded from a silk robe to a bright orange jumpsuit, and for once, his charm couldn't talk him out of it. My mother came to the house one last time, standing at the gate she no longer had a key for. She looked older, her designer clothes wrinkled and her spirit broken. She tried to apologize, claiming she only wanted the best for the family, but we both knew she only wanted the best for Sterling. "I have a room for you," I said, watching her face light up with a spark of hope. "In a very nice assisted living facility. It's paid for 6 months. After that, you'll have to use the $500 Sterling gave me to cover the rest." The hope died instantly. I wasn't being cruel. I was giving her the exact level of care she had deemed appropriate for me. I watched her walk away, realizing that she had traded a daughter who loved her for a son who used her, and now she had neither. The notice of vacancy was lifted. I hired a team of professional restorers to fix the holes Sterling had smashed in the walls and the damage he'd done to the gardens. We stripped away the modern marble and the tacky, gaming suite, returning the Victorian manor to its original, dignified glory. As I walked through the halls, the house felt light again. The family ghost wasn't a haunt of sadness anymore. It was the spirit of my grandfather and father, finally at peace because their legacy was in the hands of the person who actually respected it. I moved my father's desk back to the center of the study and placed the silver key in the top drawer. The architectural anomalies were no longer weapons. They were just parts of a home. The revenge didn't stop at the front door. The board of the Historical Society and the local bank, embarrassed by how they had let Sterling manipulate them, offered me a seat on their executive committee. I was no longer the help or the nursing daughter. I was Claire Montgomery, the woman who had saved one of the city's most important landmarks from a predatory fraud. I used my new position to ensure that Sterling's name was scrubbed from every charity and donor plaque in the city. Every time he looked at a newspaper in his cell, he would see my face at a ribbon-cutting ceremony or a gala, living the life he thought he could steal with a pen and a lie. I wasn't just winning, I was flourishing. On the 1-year anniversary of Alistair's passing, I sat in the sub-basement vault one last time. I looked at the silver key and the ledger. I had realized something important. Legacy isn't about what you take, it's about what you protect. I set up a new encryption for the estate's trust, one that would ensure the house would always stay in the hands of someone who could pass a character audit, not just a DNA test. As I turned off the lights and locked the vault, I felt a deep, quiet satisfaction. Sterling was a memory, Mom was a lesson, and I was finally the master of my own fate. The legacy eraser had finished her work, and for the first time in my life, the silence in the house was perfect.